Televisions, and welcome to this recap of our Family Learning Community session. Here is a peek at the dates and topics from earlier this year, as well as the topics for the rest of the year. Today, the curriculum department is discussing bridging gaps before summer, and instruction is addressing how to make learning visible.
So, what do we mean by bridging gaps before the end of the summer? Well, a gap is the difference between where students are and the grade level expectation. So, if you look at, let's take for example, a seventh grade English language arts standard that says, cite several pieces of textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. We can take that standard and we can break it up into parts because it's likely students don't learn the entire standard at one time. They learn parts of it. So if we break that standard up into three different learning targets, we have citing pieces of textual evidence when reading literature. I can use textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly when reading. And I can use textual evidence to support my inferences drawn from a text when reading literature. It's very likely that a student might have the first two learning targets, so they have about two-thirds of this standard, but there might be a piece that they're still yet missing, and that's the supporting inferences, which is a little bit higher of a skill than the other two learning targets.
So, like Kristen was saying, when we leaned in this session on bridging gaps, we're really focusing on question number 3 here of our 4 critical questions. How will we respond when students haven't learned the full learning targets for a standard?
So, where can we look to see what students already know? There's various formative assessments that they likely have in their class. These could be little checkpoints, little assessments. It could even be something as simple as observations. There's those teacher graded tasks, uh, those things where students receive a score and they may receive some specific teacher feedback with or without a score attached to it. Also, those summative assessments are a great place to see what students have mastered and what they haven't yet mastered. And then, of course, iReady is another good source. So, where do students have opportunities to engage with what they don't yet know yet at the end of the year? We don't have much longer in school for the year, but there's still things coming up where students will have opportunities to engage with maybe those standards or learning targets that they don't know. This could be in the form of culminating projects, year review units, any standards-based tasks, more of those summative assessments, or you might see some performance tasks as well.
So, something important to note when we're talking about bridging gaps is that skills build from year to year. So, if a student doesn't master something, we might see it come up in a little bit more of a next step or advanced skill in a later grade. So, here's an example of this in 3rd grade. This is a writing standard, and it says write opinion pieces on topics or texts supporting a point of view with reasons. Now, in 4th grade, the students are still using that skill and honing in on it, but now they're asked to go a little bit further. Now, with their reasons, they need to provide additional information. This is true all the way through 12th grade. So, here's an example of an informational reading standard for 9th and 10th grade. Students are expected to cite strong textual evidence to support their analysis of what text explicitly says, and they need to draw inferences from the text. In 11th and 12th grade, they're using this same skill, but they need to go a little bit further. They need to include determining where the text leaves matters uncertain. This emphasizes why bridging gaps is important because we'll see these skills continue to deepen in complexity year over year. So there are resources to help with bridging those gaps. And so Kristen and I are going to talk about a couple of them here. The first is Common Lit, and Common Lit has skills-based targeted lessons. And here's a specific example of one here that focuses on key ideas and details to really get into honing in on that skill and providing students opportunities to engage with it at a rigorous level. There's a couple of other examples here. Illustrative Math Tasks, iExcel, and Khan Academy are all great libraries for resources to go deeper on ELA or math skills. And then Magic School has some resources for students and for teachers um, to lean in on specific targeted skills as well. So, following sharing these resources, we turned it over to our instructional team who talked about making learning visible.
We started the instruction portion of this session by taking a minute to pause and reflect before we jumped into the strategies and framework around visible learning. When we think about learning at home, it's much more than just finishing assignments or checking boxes. We asked, what does learning look like in your home beyond completing assignments? Participants voiced that learning might look like students explaining their thinking out loud, asking thoughtful questions, making connections, solving a problem, or trying again after making a mistake. Once that learning has happened, we asked, how do we help your student actually see it? They mentioned some students don't realize how much they're growing unless we intentionally name it, celebrate it, and make it visible for them. Now I'm going to pass it to Dina, who will introduce our visible learning framework.
Thank you, Whitney. So, as Whitney was alluding, we are going to be talking about how we are going to make learning visible not just to teachers, but to the students as well. The visible learning framework is an evidence based approach where we need to be able to identify and show students exactly what they're going to be learning, how they're going to be learning it, and how they're going to be making progress along the way. Research has shown that in doing so, there is a positive impact on student achievement, and more importantly, students become active participants in the learning and take ownership of their learning process. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Whitney to talk to us about how we're going to be doing this with our students.
Thanks, Dina. This framework helps us think about visible learning as an ongoing cycle. It begins with clear learning intentions, so students know what they are learning and why it matters. From there, we want students actively participating in the learning, not just passively receiving information. Next comes continuous assessment and feedback, where we check for understanding along the way and help students reflect on their progress. Then, based on what we notice, we adapt and adjust. That might mean reteaching, giving more support, offering a new strategy, or increasing challenge. The important idea here is that learning is visible when students understand the goal, engage in the process, receive feedback, and growth over time. The first part of the framework is clear learning intentions. This means students should know what they're learning before they begin, not just what task they're completing. When students understand the purpose of the lesson, they are more likely to stay focused and make meaning of the work. For families, this can be as simple as asking, what are you learning today? Or what is the goal of this assignment? You can also help students restate the learning in their own words. When the target is clear, students are better able to monitor their progress and recognize when they are successful. This shifts the focus from just finishing work to actually understanding something new. Two examples here is a goal setting assignment for our 912 students and having student-led LP meetings. Now I'm going to pass the mic to Ashley, who's going to take us through the second part of the cycle.
Thank you, Whitney. For the second component of the Visible Learning Framework, we focused in on activating our students' engagement and participation in the learning process. A great way to do this would be to first identify how your student learns best. Although demonstrating your learning using the results of a learning style quiz won't be appropriate for all activities, however, it can give us a great insight into how our student wishes to participate in their learning. As we focus in on how to make our learning visible, we could use the results of a learning style quiz to support us in the decisions that we make in the preferred methods of demonstrating our learning. For example, if your student is a visual or auditory learner, it could look like you wanting to film it or filming yourself talking about what you've learned in a short video. Or visualizing it could look like a student using a Google slideshow to demonstrate their learning. Overall, there are many ways in which you or your student can make learning visible. Now, I will pass the mic to Dina to discuss parts 3 and 4 of the Visible Learning Framework.
Thank you, Ashley. In this part of the Visible Learning Framework, we are focusing on how learning is supported through ongoing feedback and adjustment. In this phase, students will participate in continuous assessment. This means teachers are regularly checking for understanding in various ways, not just through tests, but through conversations, observations, student reflections, and all those ways that students have been able to make their learning visible. Students are also involved in this process. They think about their own learning and may give feedback to peers. This helps them better understand what they are doing well and where they can grow. On the right, you will see an example of a feedback portfolio. This is a simple way students can track their progress over time. They can collect feedback from different sources, like their family partner educator comments, self-reflection, peer feedback, and assessment results. They can organize it into glows, what's going well for them, and grows, what they can continue to work on. This helps students take ownership of their learning. Finally, based on all of this information, the family partner and educator can make real-time decisions to adapt and adjust instruction. This is where the learning experience can be very responsive to the student's progress. If students are struggling, educators might reteach a concept in a new way, and if students are ready to move ahead, teachers can provide more challenging opportunities. The goal is simple. Learning is not one size fits all. Within the Visible Learning Framework, this ongoing cycle of feedback, reflection, and adjustment helps make learning visible so that both teachers and students can clearly understand where they are going, and how they're going to get there. After reviewing the Visible Learning Framework, our families were invited to engage in grade level specific breakout sessions with instructional coaches. These included TK through 3rd, 4th through 8th, and 9th through 12th. In the breakout room, the participants were asked to take the learning style quiz themselves and reflect on how they would make their learning visible. These slides capture the group discussion for families that have students in TK through 3rd grade. You're invited to pause the video here and review the content shared. These slides capture the group discussion for families that have students in 4th through 8th grade, and you're invited to pause the video here and review the content shared. And these slides capture the group discussion for families that have students in 9th through 12th grade. You're invited to pause the video here and review content.
Thank you for joining this recap of Bridging Gaps Before Summer and Making Learning Visible. Join us next month for community support specific to curriculum and instruction across all academies. Each session includes an overview from our curriculum coordinators, followed by breakout rooms specific to instruction based on subject and grade. It has been an honor sharing virtual space with you. We look forward to seeing you during our next round.